understanding is that the tariff announcement will come tomorrow. They will be effective immediately. And the president has been teasing this for quite some time, as you know. He's talked a lot about April 2nd as Liberation Day in America. It would be taking place today if not for April Fool's Day, but tomorrow will be the day.
Promised on his first day in office, Donald Trump is coming for the world, set to announce his so-called Liberation Day tariffs tomorrow at 4 o'clock Eastern. Canada, however, does still have some allies in Washington, with Democrats pushing a Senate bill to remove Trump's tariffs on this country.
You cannot abuse your emergency powers, President of the United States, to hurt the relationships, one of the finest relationships in the world.
This will be the largest tax increase on American consumers in modern times. End of story. And people will feel that, literally in the coming days and weeks.
We need to stand strong for a strong relationship with a good ally, Canada, and that's why I'm really, really excited we have this vote coming up.
It's, of course, a massive economic and diplomatic story playing out as leaders fight on the campaign trail to win votes. How could a U.S. trade war escalation impact this campaign? Let's bring in our front bench. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada now. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is with us. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. Tom Mulcair, former NDP leader and CTV political analyst, will be with us momentarily. We're just making sure his connection can get properly established. And rounding us out this evening, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief, Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I think it's interesting, Lisa, I'll start with you, that in prior announcements from Donald Trump around tariffs, we had some indication of the degree to which they might target Canada, or some specificity around what he would threaten. When it comes to these reciprocal tariffs, he just keeps, using words like Liberation Day, and they're going to be big, but we don't really seem to have any qualifiers from anyone in either provincial governments or the federal government. How concerned are you about what they might entail?
Well, I'm concerned. Of course I'm concerned. By the way, if Tom doesn't get here, I'll take his time, Vashi. It's okay. We can work through that.
All yours. He's there. I see him out of the corner right now. He'll be there soon.
Totally concerned, as we should be, because we don't know what we're dealing with. And the reason why I'm most concerned is the uncertainty that is being introduced into the Canadian economy, into Canadian investment, into the Canadian political arena is something that is incredibly destabilizing. So the sooner we understand tomorrow exactly what Liberation Day is, what it looks like, I think the better off we're going to be. So that's, I guess, as positive I can be. At least tomorrow we're going to know something. And then the battle will happen to figure out how we're impacted, where we're impacted, and what is going to be the outcome. But I see in both parties, they're at least, I would say the Conservatives and the Liberals, what at least they're trying to do right now is to move beyond how we're going to deal in the very short term with Mr. Trump to let's think about what the mid and longer term looks like, because the uncertainty that Mr. Trump has introduced into our economy is such that it needs to have a plan on how to actually move forward in the long term, as opposed to just thinking about retaliatory tariffs or let's get back to the table and negotiate. This song and dance could go on for 2 to 4 years. And as a result, we really do have to move on.
Yeah, I think Lisa's point about, Brian, the fact that both the Liberals and the Conservatives, and to a certain degree the NDP, but primarily the two parties who are, oh, there's Tom. Hi, Tom. Welcome. We're glad the connection worked out. They have been putting a lot of policy on the table, and it's exactly as Lisa talks about, right? It's not like how are we going to respond in this moment in time, because there's a lot of agreement about how to do that. It's about what do you do to insulate yourselves as a country moving forward, and there's even some policy convergence where that is concerned. I know there's debate about, well, who means what more and who actually will follow through on it, which is understandable. But I'm wondering from your perspective why it is, if they are both substantively addressing that issue which is at the heart of all of this, like how do we avoid this again, why it's working to one party's advantage according to public opinion polling and much less so to the others?
Yeah, well, look, I agree with Lisa's intervention. I think that there's no question that we need to, as a country, be chatting about, discussing, debating, deliberating, and during a campaign certainly offers a lot of those opportunities for us to do that, about how we, as you mentioned, insulate ourselves as best as possible moving forward. What does it mean for our sort of internal economy? What do, and lots of talk about that as of late, of course. So I think that has definitely seeped its way into the campaign. I think the Conservatives under Poilievre is certainly trying to make the argument that, you know, the Liberals over the last 10 years hadn't done enough to insulate us in this moment. And Carney's certainly doing everything that he can to try to talk about the economy and even link it very directly when possible to the U.S. And he did that in the sort of 9 days or how many days he was the prime minister before the campaign. Look, I also think you're right to say there's a bit of convergence because there's probably some things that we all recognize need to happen if we want to strengthen our economy. So I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And frankly, it might be a helpful thing to see that there's a lot of the political class in agreement of what needs to happen. And in terms of kind of maybe why, although they may be saying a lot of the same things, maybe different tone, different focus, different emphasis, but why is it helping one party over the other? I mean, I don't profess to know. My hypothesis, however, would be that when there's a crisis, and this certainly has been one over the last few weeks and months, people tend in Canada and really the Western world most likely to rally around their governments. Carney is the incumbent, was for at least a few days. And also, to be fair to Carney as well, I mean, the resume certainly, his resume is certainly sort of the right one for the right time. So I think that's probably why, if I were to guess, Liberals might be gaining a little bit more by this crisis. But Poilievre certainly is a great campaigner and he's a great communicator. And I think he's really trying to find his message on the trade conflict. And there's still a lot of time for him to figure it out.
Tom, Lisa also described it as destabilizing to the federal campaign, yes. Right? And if you think last week, you had like 3 days of what felt like a regular campaign, then whoosh, in came the auto tariffs, and things switched very quickly. You have this week where, again, you're starting to feel like, okay, we've got policy announcements, candidate controversies, for example, all the things you've come to expect in a regular campaign, and then whoosh, in tomorrow, again, will come Donald Trump with another announcement that upends the news cycle. How destabilizing, in your view, as someone who led a federal election campaign a decade ago, can you imagine that would be?
I don't think that there's ever been a precedent like this in Canadian political history, where an outside event could, as you correctly say, Vashi, on 72 hours notice, completely turn everything upside down. I also agree with Lisa when she talks about the instability for businesses. And I don't think that we realize enough just how bad it is, the chaos that is being unleashed by Trump. We talk about the business effect, we talk about the political effect, but on individual decisions, how are you supposed to manage in this situation? That's why it's so urgent to try to get ahead of it. Now, there are some smart people around Trump who are trying to calm things down. Last week was a huge success for the Liberals. Let's not underplay it. The fact that Mark Carney was able to have that discussion with Trump was unbelievable. It was a tonic. And, for Trump to be referring to him as Mark was in and of itself such a sea change from Governor Trudeau and everything else we've been through. But it doesn't change the basic formula that we're looking at here. We've got a president who is intent on bringing in a sea change that is ungovernable and totally out of control and doesn't take into account the real world of world trade. And that's the uncertainty. So Canadians right now across the board, and we had some numbers today in Quebec that show the same thing. This is collapsing into a two-way race. Mr. Poilievre is fighting very hard for his place in that race, but people need to be reassured. And when you're talking about a crisis, because this is a crisis, you look at somebody who's got experience in dealing with a crisis. And that's why it's working out quite favorably for now, because there's still lots of campaigning left, even though it's a short campaign. Nothing's decided yet. But for now, Canadians are looking very favorably at Mark Carney and his experience and expertise to get us through this crisis.
I had a friend yesterday, Rob, ask me an interesting question, which I thought would be good for the panel, which is, if tomorrow Canada somehow escapes the worst case, or it's not really as bad as has been speculated, is that good or bad for the Liberals? Because as the threat has hung over our heads, it certainly has worked to their favor.
You know what, Vashi, I was asking Conservative strategists that very question today, and this person said to me something interesting. He said, yeah, it could be good for us, the Tories, because it means that, it takes the issue off the table. But they're worried that it also could be good for Mark Carney because it could say, well, look, you see, Mark Carney calmed the waters. To Tom's point, here's the President of the United States not calling him Governor Carney. He was calling him Prime Minister Carney and Mark. And I think, so either way, the Liberals can spin a win in a strange sort of a way. I mean, so far, they are catching every possible break. I mean, here, Premier Doug Ford today was saying tomorrow is Liberation Day. It's actually Termination Day because it could be millions of jobs on both sides of the border that are affected by these tariffs. This is the largest peace hike, or the largest tax hike in American history in peacetime ever. So it's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of tumult. And I think Tom makes a very good point. Mark Carney guided the United Kingdom through the Brexit fiasco, and he was instrumental working with Prime Minister Harper and Jim Flaherty, the then finance minister, in Canada weathering the storm of the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So, yeah, it cuts both ways, I guess, actually, but it seems to only cut for the Liberals' way.
Well, I'll ask you, Lisa, the same question I posed to Brian, which is, and it's according to the public opinion polls in this moment in time, and like everyone has conceded, there's a lot more election left. But why do you think that is the case?
That Mr. Carney is getting the bump right now?
Yeah, from this issue.
Yeah, because he's new. Yeah, and I think because he's new, but I also think that we have actually not the ballot box question, because the ballot box question still is about what are we going to do in Canada regarding the United States. But I do think we have a differentiator. We have a wedge now, and the wedge has to do with whether or not there's going to be movement on legislation that the Liberals introduced with respect to the ability to build infrastructure around our fossil fuel industry in the West. And Mr. Carney today said, no, he's not going to repeal the bill. It's called Bill C-69. And Poilievre said, yep, we want to repeal it, and we want to make sure that we're going to move forward. Jason Kenney was on Twitter today, I thought being very, I think, very clear on the reasons why he contested this bill in the Supreme Court. In fact, they did win in the Supreme Court. And Mr. Carney said, no, we're going to proceed with it. So we do have a differentiator here. We do have a difference on how the economy is going to move forward. And perhaps that'll work to the advantage of the Conservatives. But at least we know what we're going to be fighting about now.
Tom, looks like you look like you want to jump in.
Well, I think it's a differentiator without a difference, because it's going to perhaps help reinforce the 20,000 vote majority that the Conservatives will get in many Alberta seats and many Saskatchewan seats. But I don't think it's going to have a heck of a lot of effect in the rest of Canada. One of the good things about this crisis, because they say never waste a crisis, is the fact that we've all begun looking at useless interprovincial barriers. François Legault, who had been steadfast in his opposition to a pipeline across Quebec, is now talking to Danielle Smith and openly talking to Quebecers about it as being part of the solution. It's not something that had been discussed or even looked at before. So these are big changes that are being wrought across the country. I understand Lisa's argument from the Conservative point of view, but I don't think it's going to pull too many more votes, or certainly any seats towards the Conservatives.
Split the difference for us,
Sad,
Brian.
Tom.
What did you say, Lisa?
I said, that makes me sad, Tom.
Brian, does it make you sad? Last word to you.
Yeah, there you go. So look, I think that there has been a bit of a convergence, more than we have certainly been used to over the last 10 years, especially since Poilievre has been the leader of the Conservatives. So him sparring with Trudeau, you can certainly paint, you can't paint a picture in which two people would be probably more polar opposites. There's been a bit more of a convergence, and I think both have gone a little bit more to the center for this campaign for, I'm sure, various reasons. We'd all have opinions as to why. That said, there are some differences. I don't think it's fair to say that they have the same platform, but I think it is fair to say that more than we've been used to in the last 10 years, they have come. There's been a rapprochement a bit of the two parties, again, for, I'm sure, strategic reasons, and also for reasons already mentioned about the trade conflict, and maybe having the Liberals go a little more to the center, the Conservatives go a little bit more to the center. Both view it as the right move to go up against what the Trump tariffs and the trade conflict could represent for Canada in the short term and also in the long term.
Yeah, everyone's fighting a common enemy. I'll take a quick break, but Lisa, Tom, Brian, and Rob,